Welcome back. So today we are going to do part 2 of the museums tour of Warsaw. So today I'm going to tell you a bit about the Polin Museum, the Life Under Communism Museum, the Catin Museum, the Chopin Museum, and I'm going to finish off with the Pinball Museum. So let's make a start. So the Polin Museum is definitely one of the biggest museums in Warsaw. It was actually opened in 2013, though the first cornerstone was laid back in about 2007. It's quite a monumental museum, and effectively what this museum is trying to do is tell you the story of the Jewish people in Poland. So we're not just talking about what happened during World War II. We're talking about how they kind of migrated to Poland, how they settled, how they were kind of greeted by the various kings, how they embedded themselves into the economy, into various cities, and it carries you through right from the kind of Middle Ages up until the present day. And so for some people, the sound of this museum might sound a bit boring, like a history museum. But actually, this museum is incredible. The amount of effort that has gone into making this a very interactive experience. Very incredibly well designed interior. Each kind of time period as such that you kind of go through has a different theme, a different feel. You have a lot of displays with kind of computer graphics, and you're playing around with menus and things. It's not really so much one for actual artifacts as such. It's more of representative, but the way it is laid out I can't give it enough credit. And it talks about the good times, and of course culminates in the bad times, and you really do get that full history there. And I talk about the architecture and the design. Well, it was actually nominated for the Chicago Athenaeum International Architecture Award. I've never heard of that before, but it sounds quite prestigious. And actually the location of the museum is quite poignant because it's set pretty much in the heart of the old ghetto, the old Jewish ghetto that was in Warsaw here in during the Second World War, so right in the kind of the heart of Muranov. And actually the word Polin is the Hebrew word for Poland, so it's quite an apt name. A couple of practical things. So make sure not to take any kind of weapons to this museum, because there is a metal detector as you go in. Obviously they're concerned about terrorist attacks. I don't know if there have been any attacks made against this museum, but they obviously take security very closely. And the price is perhaps a little bit higher, kind of 25, 30 zloty, but really you're going to need, I would say, at least 3 hours to really get to grips with this museum. They have like a temporary exhibit going on as well. At the moment it's kind of like the history of Muranov, this kind of district of Warsaw. Sadly, like the gift shop and things were currently under renovation when I was there, but for sure you were going to want to see this museum even if you don't really think you want to know much about Jewish history. The way this museum is laid out, I totally recommend it. You will not be disappointed. So, our next museum is the Life Under Communism Museum, otherwise known as the PRL Museum. And this basically tells the story of Poland after World War II. So right up until, I believe, 1989, the government of Poland was pretty much like a puppet government or a satellite government for the Soviet Union, and they were known as PRL, or the Polish United Workers' Party. But actually, this museum is quite a positive, upbeat experience. It's really telling you what day-to-day life was like in this time. So it is absolutely chock through with artifacts as such. I went there with a friend, and she was like, "Oh, I have that. Oh, I have that. Oh, I have that." So it is very, very accurate. So you see like all the old hair dryers, all the the old packaging for everything from soap to chocolate bars, coloring books, radios. You see like sports equipment. So it really does try to delve into all of those different aspects of life. You have a lot of text on the walls and nicely translated into English, telling you about films, about music, about tourism, pretty much anything you could really want to know. And it also has a few like thematic rooms as well. So you have like an old diner kind of set in the style. You see like what a kid's bedroom used to look like, what a front room used to look like. And it really is that kind of snapshot into these years. And you have a wonderful kind of timeline that spans across, which kind of gives you the highlights of everything that happened. And yeah, it was quite a cheap museum. I think about like 10 zloty or so, or 20 zloty to get into. It is a little bit cramped, so if you are slightly, COVID phobic, perhaps it's not the best museum to go to right now. And the museum itself, it was built in 2013, and it basically covers the period of like 1944 up to 1991. And it's a fun little experience. I mean, I think you can probably do it in about an hour, maybe if you're pushing it like an hour and a half. And it's located in very central Warsaw, and honestly, I think it's like the Constitution Square, and it's very apt place in the city because this is where a lot of the monuments that remain from that kind of Soviet-esque experience remain kind of embedded into some of the walls or various mosaics and things. So totally worth a visit. Okay, so our third museum it's a difficult one. So the third museum I'm going to talk about today is the Katyn Museum. Now, I kind of feel a little bit ashamed because before I came to Poland, I'd never heard of Katyn. And actually, it was one of the most horrific kind of things that happened during the Second World War. And, just to give you a very, very brief top-line explanation of what Katyn was. So it's Katyn, but it actually involves a few other places, but Katyn was like the most notorious. But what the Soviets did is they basically gathered up the kind of the elites. So you had like the academics, the politicians, like the Polish army officers, any kind of academic they could find. And in total, some 22,000, I believe, of these people were killed. They were taken away to basically be shot in the back of the head. There's an incredible movie that I really recommend you watch by the same name, by Katyn, which was released in 2007, and the person I was watching it with actually kind of burst into tears. It's one of these subjects that is so raw in the Polish spirit because of just the sheer atrocity of what was going on, the insane inhumanity. And this is one of those things that was like hidden nobody knew where the bodies were, and they were like dug up, decades later, in these kind of mass graves in the middle of nowhere. And the museum itself is a real kind of testament to that. So it feels like it's kind of set in like this old bunker. At least that's the feel to it. It's kind of part of like this sort of area called the Citadel complex. So the architecture is rather striking when you go into this museum, and you have the kind of timeline. You have a lot of kind of like cabinets with kind of, well, basically personal belongings of the people that were killed, and you have stories of certain people that were a victim to this atrocity. And you keep going through, and you hear like how it was represented in the media, how the politicians from other countries talked about it, all these different things. And then when you keep going, you'll go down to this kind of basement area, and there you basically see so many artifacts, like thousands of artifacts that were taken from the graves, that were buried with the soldiers and the academics and everyone who was massacred there. It's free entry, so you don't really have an excuse not to go. Though it isn't always strictly in English. They kind of translate a lot of stuff, but not everything. So I was there with my phone using Google Translate, and not perhaps the most practical things. They do say that there's an audio guide that you can download an app and use on your phone, which I wish I'd done beforehand. I don't know if it's in English, but I presume it will be. The museum itself was built in 1993. And sure, it's not a pleasant story. I'd say it's not really a place to take your children. It can be a bit graphic at times, but it's such a powerful museum that really I think everyone should see it. It's like a few years ago when I went to Auschwitz. I mean, I think that you need to know about the atrocities that happened here. As I say, they really do help to explain what the Polish people have been through, and this was a really tragic story. Okay, so our next museum is the Chopin Museum. So, Chopin, he was technically born just outside of Warsaw, in a place I keep forgetting. Well, it's something Wola, and I struggle to pronounce the first name. But it's not too far from here. It was within the Duchy of Warsaw, as they call it. But he actually spent most of his youth in Warsaw, attending various schools and things. And so this museum is, funnily enough, dedicated to him. And the museum actually dates back to 1954 originally, though I'm guessing it's been modernized a few times since then, because honestly, like, from the outside it looks pretty normal, but once you get in there, wow. It's kind of like this, like, part of it's like this giant cavern underground. So you have like a small concert hall in there where they do recitals. They have various displays and things, telling you a lot about like his early history, and it shows a lot of the kind of manuscripts and kind of editions of his work and correspondence that he had, and a lot of kind of personal items belonging to him. I mean, I had to admit, I kind of wish I'd gone there with somebody who was a bit more of an expert on Chopin, because I was kind of a newbie. But this guy, like this 19th century composer who was like a kind of Renaissance man of his time, Absolutely incredible music, and from a very early age, he just had this skill, this amazing talent. It just sort of came naturally. So he was, totally like a virtuoso with the piano, as well as being a very talented composer. You also have a few slightly random things in this museum, like you have a cast of his left hand. You have like a cast of the death mask, that he was wearing, when they put him to the grave. And it's a really well laid out museum. It has its own Wi-Fi, in case you start panicking that you can't use your Wi-Fi in there. And there's an app you can download, which tells you a bit more. One thing I would totally recommend, which I just didn't think about, is having some headphones for your phone. Especially with like the whole corona restrictions, you're not allowed to use any of like the headphones on the displays. So what they do is they say, right, scan this QR code, it will take you to a link, and then you can access things, because there's an entire room just dedicated to his music, and there are all these different banks where you can just sort of listen to this type. And unfortunately, I couldn't really enjoy that because I didn't bring my headphones with me, and I wasn't just going to blare it out on my phone. I thought that might have been a bit rude. There's some like slight recreations of where he was living. There's a lot of tales about his movements throughout Europe. So again, charming museum to go to. I think I was there for about an hour and a half or so, and again, it was about sort of 25, 30 zloty. So, not going to break the bank, especially if you're coming from the UK. So well worth it. And, again, fairly central. So not too difficult to get to. And yeah, totally recommend that. Okay, so the final museum is, as I say, I like to have a fun museum in each of these videos, just to kind of take away from the serious a bit. And this is the Pinball Museum. So this is something like I kept telling people, I want to see the Pinball Museum, and they're like, the what? Because maybe not everyone in Poland recognizes what the word pinball is. And then when I explained them, they're like, there's a museum for that? And I was like, yeah, I found it on Google. I went to one very similar in Krakow, and it has quite a similar theme. So what is it? It is as how it sounds. It is a museum full of pinball machines. But it's a bit more than that. So you have pinball machines, but you have like arcade machines. So lots of kind of old style games from like the 80s and the 90s, including like racing games like Sega Rally and stuff like that. You have the shooting games, so like Time Crisis and like Terminator style stuff. A lot of the pinball machines themselves are themed. So you have like an Indiana Jones one, you have a Terminator 2 one, you have like a Star Trek The Next Generation one, which I was quite thrilled by. As well as like various TV shows and movies, and then just the fun ones. So, a few practical things about this museum. So firstly, it's a little bit away from the centre. So the nearest tram is probably about 10 minutes walk from it. And if you're not comfortable using the trams in Warsaw, you probably want to get an Uber there. It's not like a million miles away from everything. It's fairly close to the Uprising Museum, geographically speaking. It's a bit further on from that. But yeah, so finding it isn't too difficult. It's just getting there, which is slightly tricky. Then when you get there, one thing I was slightly scared because I got there and there was just this big door and like the sign was lit, but I'm like, is it open? And then I thought I could hear some noise, so I did try the door, and it's like, yes, thank God it was open. So do try the door if you get there, because it might look closed, but it's probably not. In fact, it has very late opening hours. It's open till like 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, depending on the day you go. But another practical thing is book in advance. So I didn't. I just showed up on the door And the guy looked a little bit confused. He was like, have you done a reservation? And I was like, no. And so apparently a lot of kind of groups book this out. They have like capacity numbers, I suppose, especially now in COVID times. So you just go to the website, it's all in English, so that's not a problem. They let me in. They said, oh, luckily we had a cancellation, so we can let you in. And you pay 40 zloty, which, okay, that might sound a bit much for a museum, but okay, let me finish. Because that 40 zloty basically entitles you to free reign on all of the machines in there. So, okay, admittedly, some of them were under repair, but only a small number, maybe like 2 or 3%. So that wasn't too bad. I think I easily spent 2 hours in there and I didn't even notice the time fly by. It was a big nostalgia trip for me, going back to a lot of games that were even before my time, and I was like, okay, I'll give this a go. And yeah, it was just fun. To be honest, quite a young vibe in there. Most of the people that I saw in there were kind of like teenagers and stuff, but you don't have a problem with people that age in Warsaw. And the museum itself, it was established in kind of 2016, so it's been open for just over 4 years now. And honestly, yeah, there are over 100 machines in there. There are 2 floors. You're not going to get bored in that museum, so do check it out. It's well worth the trip. Allow yourself a couple of hours at least. I think during the better times you can buy beer in there. Sadly you couldn't when I was there, but maybe when restrictions are down. So brilliant. Okay, so this was round 2. I've got at least one more video coming, at least in this spell, because they've closed the museums again because of COVID. Well, this is what we had to live with. But I saw a good 15 or so museums in the last few weeks, so I feel quite accomplished. So I'll talk about some more of the museums that I went to in the next session. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, give it a like. If you know anyone who's keen to see museums in Warsaw, then share it with them. And if you'd like to see more content from this channel, please do subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.